Okay, here we go. Part 6. Hopefully I haven't. Welcome back. Bordone's story, Part 6. When we last left off, the main character, Aiden Fragonard, had just been imprisoned. He'd found out the truth that his father was still imprisoned in the portrait, and Botticelli had painted himself in his father's image. So, Fragonard's imprisoned, and he meets a mysterious man. As you can see here, the man with the Picasso of a face. And we'll be reading that chapter, part 6. And Bordone is telling Fragonard his story. Let's get started. Listen to my story, young Aiden, prince and heir to the throne of the kingdom of Fragonard. For it is a cautionary tale, and one that may help you in your battle to defeat Botticelli. I was a painter once, and apprenticed to my father, who was the king's royal painter. He painted all portraits for our king and his family, and he would have no other. Though I was heir to this position of royal importance, I was never quite as good as my father. I knew if the day so shall arrive that he could paint no more, I very well may have been replaced with another. This did not bother me, though, for I was quite happy with the things I painted and the meager living I made. Then one day Botticelli showed up in our kingdom with claims that he was truly the most masterful painter in all the land, and there was no rival, including my father. Though he was revered by many and perhaps a greater painter than my father and I, the king still proclaimed he would have no other. This pleased my father and me greatly to know that our future was secure and that we were held in such high regard. Then late one night, Botticelli visited our galleria. I saw him peeking through the back window, so I went outside to confront him and his outrageous claims against my father. He was very quick to apologize and explained that he was merely looking to make a name for himself, not to try to replace me or my father. I forgave his claims and asked if he would come inside and join me for a cup of tea. He was very polite and said that he didn't want to impose. I said perhaps another night then, and maybe I should have left it at that. But he offered to show me his paintings in hopes of making amends. I agreed, but only because I felt pity for this man despite his arrogance. He showed me his paintings, which were quite magnificent. I asked if he cared to leave some behind, in hopes I could sell a few for a small fee. He agreed, if only I allow him to sleep in our backyard for the night. I told him it would be all right, so long as he was up and gone by morning, of course. The next day, I discovered to my dismay he was still asleep, despite our arrangement. I knew right then and there it was a mistake to let him spend the night, so I told him to get up, for my father would be arriving soon and he would be displeased greatly. Botticelli asked if I had any food that I might be able to spare. I gave him an apple and told him he could pick up his paintings at the end of the day, if they didn't sell, but assured him that with such fine work I'd have no problems at all. I then asked that he keep the deal between the two of us, for I did not want to upset my father. I promised myself this would be the last dealings I would have with this ragged beggar man. Before he left, he told me of some fine painter's bristles that he carried with. He asked if I could turn them into a paintbrush. I told him that I didn't make my own, but that a painter down the street by the name of Rayburn made all of my brushes for me. I gave him a small advance, for I did not want him to welch on a debt to such a dear friend and spoil my good name. Just as he was out of sight, my father showed up and saw the new paintings I had hanging on his walls. He asked where I had discovered such fine work. I felt bad lying to him, but I had no choice. I told him that a man from another kingdom was visiting for a short time, and asked that I sell his paintings to pay for his travels. My father was quite fond of this mysterious artist and asked to meet with him. I was reluctant to comply with an answer. I told my father that unfortunately he had to leave right away on urgent matters. He told me to explain to the man that if he were to return after his pressing matters, he could make a handsome living at our galleria. I told my father I would talk with this stranger whom we did not know, that I was sure that he'd be quite pleased with this news. When night fell, Botticelli returned with a smile on his face, for he carried with a box that contained his new paintbrush and the fate of our two kingdoms. He asked for his pay, another cup of tea, and that he might be able to spend one more night amongst the flowers in our backyard. I was about to send him on his way when my father met him at the door. He asked if this was the painter who had such fine work hanging on his walls earlier in the day. Botticelli introduced himself and apologized for his words that he spoke so foolishly when he first entered our kingdom. My father quickly forgave him, for he truly could back up his own words. My father asked if he cared to become a regular painter at his galleria, and offered to let him sleep the night on a cot, but he oddly declined. He said the grass and the flowers in the backyard would suit him just fine. The next morning my father and I returned to our galleria to the sounds of Botticelli sleeping soundly and content on his bed of grass and flowers. I was displeased with his laziness, but my father never complained, for over the next few months his paintings sold quite well. Then one day the king announced he was throwing a party for my father's birthday and asked that I be in attendance. My father asked that I show up to the galleria to tell Botticelli that he would not be needed for the day. I set off to tell him, even though I knew he'd be sleeping and it wouldn't make a difference to bother him. I told him about the party and was sure he'd be pleased with a day of no disturbances. Upon hearing this news, he got up and asked if he could go with. I told him that it was for people of royal importance only. He seemed rather upset. I told him, though, I had no say in the matter, and it would be up to the king, not I, but that perhaps I would mention word to my father. Later on that night, I mentioned that to my father of his interest in meeting with the king. My father told me he probably still has dreams of becoming the royal painter, but assured me that would never happen. I smiled and had a good laugh at the very thought of Botticelli ever having a position of royal importance. Shortly thereafter, I grew tired of the ramblings of old men, so I retired to the galleria with a bottle of wine and a loaf of sweetbread. I knew Botticelli well, and I knew he would appreciate the gifts. The garden in the backyard seemed quite flush with flowers. They were blooming bright as the day under the moonlight. I offered the wine and bread, which he quickly consumed. He then asked if I cared to go with him on a walk. I agreed, for I felt even this lazy oaf should have a good time on my father's birthday. And so off we went for a walk, passing by all the dwellers in the night, till we came upon a man with a tattoo of a poorly drawn dragon on his arm. Botticelli stopped and asked the man if he cared to see his tattoo in a better light. The man got terribly angry towards his remarks. He was quite happy with this scribble on his arm. That was the first time I'd ever seen the paintbrush in action. He pulled out his brush and palette and painted the dragon right off this man's forearm, sending it chasing after him down the street. I was in complete awe, and so was everyone else around us. He then withdrew the dragon and painted it on his own arm to be used upon our kingdom later on. The next day I showed back up at the Galleria, thinking that the horrific events of the night before were a dream. Botticelli was talking with my father. He offered him a late birthday present to paint his portrait and his forever unknowing fate. My father accepted this gift. Botticelli then explained that on one condition. He asked that my father return later in the evening, so that he may better paint in his own comfortable way. It was agreed, and so my father's fate was truly sealed forever. Later on that night, I showed up at the Galleria to check in on the progress and to see for myself a true painter paint. I came around the back and peeked in through the window, as not to disturb two masters conversing. It was too late by then. My father had been imprisoned in the canvas, with Botticelli his victor. I screamed at this horrific sight, announcing my arrival. Botticelli came running out the back door with paintbrush in hand. That's when he painted my face into this Picasso of a mess you see before you. I ran off into the night as Botticelli painted the dragon right off his arm to unimaginable heights and sent it chasing after me. When I felt I had outrun him, I took to an alleyway and looked down at a puddle in the street to see for myself what he had done to my face. The reflection was a colorful, broken mess. I sat down and cried until day broke. He had painted our kingdom to doom. The only thing that stopped him from his vengeful rampage was daylight and a light mist of rain that fell over the kingdom, washing away all the horrors he had created. I warn you, however, young Fragonard, he has grown far more powerful since then, and the light mist of rain will not stop him or undo his magic now, for it has become oil-based. The next day, all the people could talk about was the horrors that ran in the night and stories of a madman with a paintbrush that did unimaginable things. The king immediately ordered all painters and things related be banished from his kingdom, except for my father and I, of course. What the king didn't know, however, is that sadly, my father was a portrait, and that I bear a face unrecognizable to him. I left with the portrait of my father in hopes of releasing him from his fate, and followed him to your kingdom. Unfortunately, all artwork was destroyed days earlier, including the portrait of my father, and there was nothing I could do to save him. Along the way to your kingdom, I ran into my old friend Rayburn, who had made the brush for him months earlier. He told me of how Botticelli didn't offer full value for his services, so he kept some of the bristles to make another brush for full payment of his services. Together, Rayburn and we quickly learned the secrets of the brush, and soon realized that neither one of us possessed the skills necessary to truly masterfully use it. So he gave me the brush in hopes that I would find someone someday to restore the good name of our kingdom's painters and avenge my own fate as well as my father's. And that is why I stand before you this night, wearing this cloak, and in current possession of a second brush, young Aidan, prince and heir to the throne of the kingdom of Fragonard, in hopes that you will become our victors, and end this nightmare once and for all. And that, young reader, was the end of his story, and where mine truly began. Okay, stick around. for the final act. I hope you enjoyed it so far. Thank you.